Terrific. I see your screen now, Jonathan. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got a nice group of attendees today. Again, let me thank everyone for joining us this afternoon. My name is Jeff Jenkins. I'm an account manager here at Algorithm. And I appreciate the fact that you're making some time with us, especially if you attended the Macola Evolve Customer Conference last week. I know that many of you were there, and we were able to speak with you. You were considering upgrading, and so upgrading to Macola 10, and so the timeliness of our webinar was not by accident. We actually had planned this some time ago to actually address some of the questions that we knew were going to be coming following the Macola conference. So today what we're going to be doing is focusing on Exact Macola, or the Macola 10.6 release, which is the current version, and specifically focusing on what are the compelling reasons that you should be considering when thinking about upgrading to Macola 10, regardless of whether you're on Macola Progression or Macola ES. We realize that the factors that you're considering when thinking about an upgrade may be different. And so our goal here today is to go over some of the new functionality that Jonathan's going to show in some of the new screens, but more importantly, to try to address those questions of what is going to be involved with upgrading, and what are the factors that we should be considering, both in terms of deciding whether to upgrade to Macola 10, and then how we plan out our project. And with that said, I just want to add a couple of items to let you know we are recording today's presentation. We will publish that on our YouTube channel once the recording is available to us from WebEx. And then the second thing, I will let you know that we do have all of our attendees' phones muted on entering the WebEx session, simply so that we can avoid the ambient noise in the background. We will, however, have a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Feel free to submit your questions at any point during the presentation, either via the chat or the Q&A function in WebEx. I'm going to be fielding those questions during the presentation, and then when we get to the Q&A section at the end of the presentation, I'll make sure that we cover those, or we will follow up directly with you after the webinar if we're unable to answer all the questions in the allotted time. I think that's all the housekeeping issues that I wanted to get out of the way. And I know that you're not here to listen to me speak, so I'm going to go ahead and mute my phone. I'm going to turn things over to my colleague, Jonathan Nelson, who is our presenter for today. Jonathan, the ball is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I wanted to start by saying that I understand that we probably have a mixed group of progression users and Macola ES users. And the path to upgrade is slightly different, a little bit more complicated for a progression user. But I will go over how we approach these, and also some of the newer features that are coming up in Macola 10.6. But most of the focus will be on how we go about running our conversions and how things look. So from a Macola 10 perspective, this is what a Macola 10 main screen would look like. There are a couple of different ways to approach this. So you end up with a lot more options when it comes to Macola 10 versus, say, Macola ES or Progression. I have the web-based synergy view that allows me to go to multiple areas, run my applications off of modules, run my applications off of the back office. The back office is basically Macola ES as a structure. So the progression users will see this as being very different, but the Macola ES users will see this as being very similar. So a look and feel from the perspective of Macola 10 to progression is going to change a lot. Macola 10 ES to Macola 10 is going to be a very similar look and feel with a lot more robust activities that you can do and connections to the different areas of the software. One of the large things that you get from that also is that the licensing changes, so that a lot of users in progression used production order processing, for instance, but never went into shop floor control because they didn't want to pay for the extra license. And when you buy Macola 10, you have access to all of the modules. The module-based licensing has gone away, so you have the capability to expand how you use Macola. You can get into material requirements planning, shop floor control, maybe more bill of material or standard cost type functions. So a lot of the modules that a lot of people didn't purchase because they just didn't know if they needed them now become available to them to continue to expand how they use Macola and grow it across their business. I wanted to touch a little bit on how we approach a conversion. So one of the key things with getting data converted and ready for Macola 10 is that the financial system changes pretty drastically. You're going from the progression methodology to the Macola 10 methodology. The tables are different, the structure is different, and the way that the everything posts from a financial perspective is different. So the data has to be put together and aligned in order for it to be converted. That can be pretty intensive out of the gate. We have a document that we use to control that. We call it a process control document. We've put a lot of time into how we manage this. We capture the characteristics of each environment so that as we work through this and the different individuals within our business that participate in these conversions handle their areas, the environment is documented. We go through data prep. We identify what needs to be purged, what programs need to be run, file validations, capturing issues. So as we run through the process, we capture all of the different data variables that can cause problems. To facilitate capturing those data variables that cause problems, we have created a utility to run through that. So we have a schema check that our internal programmer has created that allows us to evaluate that data. We also have another document called the data review. And this process allows you to point this at a progression database, and it runs through your file validations and all of the validations that the conversion utility runs through, and gives you a summary of everything that's wrong with your data. We give that to the users. We put that on their site, and we allow them to run that so that they can analyze their data and identify where their issues are. It shows anywhere where your AR to GL is out of balance, your AP to GL is out of balance. It shows you what transactions are out of balance. It gives you quite a bit of detail to be able to go chase those. I'm not sure if any of you have ever run the file validation reports before, but they're very difficult to read. You get an instance for every activity that's wrong. You get a row in there. So you could have a file validation report that is 120 pages, but there's only 4 things wrong with your data. So you really only need to run 4 queries in order to clean all that up. But to figure that out, you have to wade through 120 pages. Ours will summarize that into the 4 issues that you have with the data and tell you how many records are bad. And then we have queries that we've written that we use to do most of the typical cleanups. This can be something like in the item master, if I go through and create an item and I don't tab through every field in progression, I don't get Ys and Ns for checkboxes. I end up getting a null, and the conversion utility can't handle a null in some of those, whether the item is back orderable or if it's an MRP item, or there's multiple flags in there that can cause problems with the conversion, and that the conversion utility will prevent you from running the conversion if any of these scenarios exist. So our utility does a great job of helping us to go after that data and give you a much more succinct way of chasing it. It also runs a lot faster. I've never seen it run more than, say, 10 minutes. And I've seen some of those file validations, especially on like your manufacturing cost detail or your MC detail or shop floor detail records. I've seen those run 3 or 4 hours all by themselves. So we go through this process to help us streamline how we do this. It's a very regimented approach. Capture your environment, do the data prep, utilize a utility to capture what the data issues are, get all of the data issues cleaned up pre-conversion. We run a conversion. We walk through that process, verify that everything ties out. Any issues that the conversion has, we then submit back to the customer so that they can go through issue resolution. The way that the financials convert is that everything flows from progression into a single account. And that account holds all of the transactions. At the end of the day, that account should be a zero. If it's not a zero, then something flowed from a progression account into the holding account and didn't flow into the correct destination. So you then have to go through and troubleshoot why that conversion suspense account is not at zero. That can be where most of the problems occur in a conversion, is in the data. The data not getting converted right, transactions that were done and not found, and write-offs were done over the years, and that all flows into the conversion suspense, because this conversion process will capture all of your financial errors and every record. A good for instance is that if I have accidentally processed a financial transaction with the year 2033 instead of 2013, but because I was running my reports, I wasn't running reports with no end date, I never found that transaction. So I just put in a balancing transaction and the GL wrote it off to make my general ledger balance, and I moved on with my life. This process will find those transactions and it will try to apply them somewhere. And if it doesn't find anywhere to apply them, it leaves them in the conversion suspense, and we have to go figure out what those are. You don't have to necessarily get it down to zero, but you do have to identify what all those transactions are. That's where the conversion financial comes in. That conversion suspense account has to be zero. Financial comparisons, so identifying what your trial balance was, your AP trade accounts, AP aging, what your resource who tested it is, the progression amount, the ES amount, what the variance is, and then go after those steps. We have our actual conversion. So when we convert the data, we keep track of how long it takes, where everything is stored, what the users are, so that we know what the status is, and that gives us an idea of how long the live conversion will take to be able to schedule everything for when we take you live. And then there are always going to be post-conversion steps. So even after you convert the data, there are things you have to go in and do. You have to set up your general journals. You have to verify that your bank journals are created. You have to verify that the conversion suspense is set to zero. There are different steps that you have to do after you take this live, and we have a checklist for what those steps are. This is performed during the initial conversion, and we capture all of this data so that when we do your actual go live, we have all the information that we need in order to make that a smooth and seamless operation for a go live step. To go with that, we also provide a project issues list where we capture all of the issues that occur during your piloting. We also have pilot plans that we provide. So we have a synergy pilot plan. We have a Macola pilot plan. I just have to look in the right place. And we provide this to the customers so that they can take a look at by module, what needs to be tested, how they need to test it, all of the different variables involved. Everybody runs things in their own unique way, so obviously this is a customizable document, but this gives end users a framework with which to begin designing how they're going to go through that pilot process. So the key there is data. Data is the challenge. The second step is going to be training. A lot of your end users on the manufacturing and distribution side of the coin, it will be relatively seamless. They will open up an enter order screen in the back office, and it will look very similar to what they're used to seeing. This looks very similar to what a progression order entry window is. My header and my line records are on the same tab instead of two different tabs. The organization for how an item entered is now horizontal rather than a vertical form. But in general, those users will look at this and they will understand what to do. The names are very similar. The process steps are very similar. And there won't be a lot of change. From an item master perspective, the way they look up an item may be a little bit different. The search is a little bit more dynamic. It has a little bit more information. But once I get into it, it's still organized the same. it's a little bit more logical. I don't have tab 1, tab 2, tab 3. I have tabs that have logical titles based on the information presented on them, so basics and logistics and purchasing. So my distribution and manufacturing users will see a relatively seamless transition. We don't do detailed training in general for a conversion for the manufacturing and distribution users. We do a differences training, and we show people where the differences are. A lot of that's around navigation and where they click in order to get to information, and showing them where the enhanced features are. For instance, on that order entry screen, I now have buttons down the right side that allow me to do quite a few more things than what I could do before in progression. So those types of differences training. A lot of the changes come on the accounting side. How I set up my customers, I have the whole concept of cards now, where I can click on a customer and I can go look at detail and transaction detail. How I match cash flow, the concept of customers and vendors being creditors and debtors, that's where most of my changes come. So the financial team will get very detailed training on how things have changed and how to do their jobs in the new system, because that is where they will see the vast majority of the differences. They've reorganized how this looks, but in general, security will work the same. The system tab is where a lot of processes and maintenance items were set up. So from the perspective of a system user or an administrator that went through, if I had maintain, view, transactions, processes, and reports, a lot of the maintain and the processes were moved out to the system tab, and then the transactions and views were exposed. So all of the menu options in general are exposed on this screen. Now, we have found some users that really like to look at it a different way. They like to look at it the way they used to. So for those users, you can still change the view to classic style or explorer style. And explorer style is going to feel very much like a progression menu. You can go ahead and create your same methodology for how you create your shortcuts and put your notes for your shortcuts. So we do have some users that still feel very comfortable with this type of an environment, and you have the capability to set it up that way. So there are options. The panel view is what most of our users use, and you still have the capability to have shortcuts here as well, as you can see. So it's very user-friendly and relatively easy to transition people from a user perspective to get them from working in progression. Now, with a Macola 10, this is the back office. There are a few different ways to do almost everything. So from a Macola 10 perspective, I can log into my website, and this is my Macola 10 entry point. I have modules out here, and from those modules, I can go to my core ERP, and I can get to the same order entry window, and I can open that same back office order entry window from here. I also have the capability to open a web-based order entry window. And as they have continued to expand the functionality and add more functionality to this system, there's also a new order entry window. And this is what that looks like. It's loading a little slowly here, but we'll give that a second. So part of what we do is we sit down with your companies and your users and your management team, and we identify what is the best way for your company to be able to utilize the functionality, keep your users able to use the system, and move them forward. So this is another version of the order entry screen. This came out in 10.6.1 for Macola 10, so relatively recently. But it is a more dynamic entry screen as they continue to try to advance the architecture behind Macola 10 and add new functionality and new ways to look at things. This is an example of a workspace. So we have some companies that we convert that operate primarily out of the back office, and they have the majority of their users that operate here. and then they have some management users that operate here out of a workspace. We have other companies that have converted every user to do everything within a workspace, and they give them buttons to be able to open the functions that they need. We give them the information that they need in order to operate, whether it be opportunities, a sales funnel report, their won opportunities, favorites, and then the capabilities to drill down on that information through this workspace to other areas. It is customizable, and it really is an individual approach. I can go into a workflow from there. I can click on my different functions and be able to work through all of my information. So these are linkable. I assume that a lot of you have already seen demos of Macola 10, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time getting into the details of how you can operate within this. But it is an individual decision, business by business, on how far management wants to go with changing how users interact with the system. You can keep it simple and have people operate within the back office. What we see a lot is that order entry clerks that don't need information to do their job other than they're being given a stack of orders to enter may stay in a desktop application, whereas somebody who's managing that group might use a workspace to give them higher visibility so that they can make decisions based on the information provided within the workspace. So people who are doers may stay in a desktop, and people who are information-driven employees would operate out of a workspace. But once again, that's a matter of preference that can be driven based on the individual company and users as far as what they need in order to accomplish their jobs. Just going to do some housekeeping there and close some of those. I'm going to flip over here and show a little bit of the PowerPoint as far as what some of the enhanced features are. So I showed you the order entry. But the beginning of this shows you just the Macola 10 modules overview. So the manufacturing, project management, distribution, quality management, you can see all of the different top items and then all of the elements below. A lot of these elements, especially progression users, but even ES users who still only converted the modules that they owned, didn't have access to a lot of this information, or they may not have had Event Manager, or they didn't have Synergy, so they didn't have workflow capabilities. So a lot of this is part of the conversation when we sit down and do a process analysis and design for how your company is going to use Macola. We identify what areas make sense for you to use a workflow. Do you have a purchasing request system that makes sense for a workflow to be in place? Is there vacation requests or HR processes that make sense for you to have a workflow in place? These are all things that we do as part of the discovery and process design. But with that comes all of the additional modules that you have access to. You have to decide how far you want to take that. Are you going to do an as-is conversion? Are you going to take the modules that you use in Progression or Macola ES today and just convert those to Macola 10 and operate that way? Or are you going to also then extend how you use it today and take advantage of the additional functionality that you now own? So that integrated functionality that Macola 10 brings to the table is, for instance, is a quote-to-cash process. I'm on the Synergy side, web-based, doing sales opportunities and entering quotes in Synergy, and that quote gets promoted and it generates a workflow, and that workflow then generates a process sales order, and I have an automated notification that gets sent out via Event Manager to tell people that an order was created. I then have a pick ticket that gets printed and MRP that gets processed, and then purchase orders are automatically created based on MRP requirements. Production orders can be automatically created based on force demand. I run through that process and I ship the order, and I automatically invoice my customer via Event Manager, so I don't have to email or print and paper send invoices. So this entire process is an integration of all of those different elements that you get in a Macola 10 environment. So typical problems with no ERP or an old ERP process. You know, you have a lot of manual steps, you have paper filing, you have delays, you don't know where people are. I know that we got a quote. I don't know where the quote is. It didn't get entered. Who's responsible for it? Whose box is it in order to know who's supposed to take the next step or the approval. And Workflow gives you the capability to see where that is. The business activity monitoring or event manager gives you the capability to send out automated notifications so that people can be told that they have something that they need to do, or other people can be told that this is where it is within their process. And then workflows can be entered, and you can automate that whole process. So it becomes an automated system that is driving your business rather than you having to drive stuff into the system just to be able to do the next step. It starts to give you feedback. You start to get information back out of the system. So part of what you get with Macola 10 is 42 out-of-the-box role-based ready-made workspaces. Some of those workspaces are exactly what you need, and some of them you customize. So you can create workspaces and share them as needed when you come into the system. And people can be granted workspace access based on rights. I can go in and create different types of workspaces for different areas. This would be an example of a manufacturing workspace. This is one that's been customized. You could typically what we would do is start with the out-of-the-box workspaces, allow end users to review those out-of-the-box workspaces, and then go from there and decide what to do after that. You have brand new transactional screens, which we looked at a little bit with the order entry screen. So they've added more methods for how to get to information and to streamline the use and continue to advance the technology and allow users to be more dynamic in how they interact with the system. Along with that is the new API model, which allows more open source technology and people's capabilities to link into the Macola data and utilize it across more systems. Better integration into point of sale processes, or the capabilities to handle credit card transactions and other applications and third-party systems allow you to hook into these systems with these new API models so that you can extend the use of the software to areas outside of just your standard internal ERP system. And then better reporting and access to data, that the workspaces put that information in front of users so that they can make decisions based on information. So that new design of the web-based OE screen, support editing of orders in different statuses. You can, on the fly, contact entry, select for billing out of that screen. All of this feeds into a more streamlined process that comes from converting from Progression to Macola 10. I think that I have spoken enough at this point. I'd like to take a break and ask if there are any questions.
Thank you, Jonathan. Actually, we got a couple of questions right during the beginning, so why don't we go ahead and tackle those?
Okay.
And while we're going through those, if any of our attendees have additional questions, please feel free to submit those either through the chat window or through the Q&A panel in WebEx. Now, Jonathan, the first question I got was when you were talking early on about bad data.
Yes.
And the question came in just the way I'm reading it. How likely is it that my data is bad?
98%.
Okay. Could you expand on that just a little bit?
we have yet to do a conversion where something wasn't wrong with somebody's data. Progression allows you to do a lot of things to fix or band-aid financial data. It allows a lot of transactions that the Macola 10 financial platform won't. So everything has to balance for the data to be converted just out of the gate. So there are a lot of people that do monthly adjustments to get AR in balance because they know that they have transactions that were entered off or they can't find, so they just adjust them out. If your data is balanced, I mean, we have customers where we have sat with them and their financial teams, and they said, our data is good, everything's in balance, and then we do an analysis and we find out that it's not in balance. They force it to be in balance every month end, but that doesn't mean it's in balance. So we have yet to come across, that's actually, we have one customer that I have converted where their data was perfectly clean. But the caveat to that is that they started a brand new company based on an acquisition 6 months before we started the conversion. So they had only been using that Macola company that we were converting for 6 months. That was a perfectly clean conversion.
So are you saying then that the more historical data that somebody has in their system, the more likely it is that there is bad data in that?
Absolutely.
Okay. Okay. And then the follow-up question obviously was, are there things that the end users can do on their own to mitigate some of that bad data that is out there?
Yeah, absolutely. So that you can start a purge policy, and if you don't need all of that historical data from 15 years ago in progression, you can purge it. You can create a copy of the database so that you have that historical record if you ever want to refer back to it. Most people don't need to, but you can have that just for a warm, fuzzy feeling, and then you can start cleaning some of that historical data out of your system. Macola has multiple methodologies for how to purge data and how to limit what's in there. So you can start that process to limit what's in there. You can also run the file validations on your own. They're under the System Manager menu, File, Maintain, System Utilities, File Validations, and you can run your file validations against all of your data. And then you can make sure that everything's in balance. At the beginning of our process, we would be giving you our tool anyway, which would then tell you everything that's wrong.
And I'm glad that you mentioned our utility because that ties into a next question that I got, which was, do other firms like Macola, for instance, have similar tools, or are the utilities that you've been describing proprietary to Algorithm?
The utilities that I'm describing are proprietary to Algorithm. We created those internally there, and they are Algorithm products.
Okay. And then we got a follow-up to your previous answer just a second ago. We were talking about historical data, and we got a question, is there a rule of thumb about how much data, how much history you should bring forward when doing an upgrade?
You know, most companies have policies on what they're required to retain. What it really comes down to is when I convert everything into the new system, how far back do I want to be able to report? So sales information, you pretty much keep all of your sales information. But from a distribution, a GL perspective, and audit files, by the way, audit files aren't converted at all, so you can completely blow those away. But there are other transactions that you may or may not need to bring over. What it really comes down to is how far back do I want to be able to report utilizing the new system. So any data that I want to be able to report on in a continuous fashion with my current live data, I'd want to retain that data as far back as that. And understanding that I would probably retain all of my sales history and inventory usage.
Okay, so you would make distinctions then between certain parts of the data than other parts of the data.
Correct. There are a few different ways to do an upgrade. You can do a master file only upgrade and not bring any history over and just convert your master files. And a couple of our customers have chosen that path. They've just done a master file conversion. We've gotten them up and running on the new system, and all of their history just stayed in progression. And if they needed it, they went to that database and created crystal reports to run against that database, and they pulled their data that way. So you can do a master file conversion, or you can do a full conversion.
Okay, and then we got a little bit different variation on this question. Is the conversion from Macola ES to 10 as in-depth as the one from progression that you showed?
It is not. So the process is a lot more simplified. It becomes more about process design and where you want to go with what your processes are. You don't have to worry about the data side of it, and you don't have to worry as much about the training side. Your users already know how to do the core functions. So the training then becomes training users how to create workflows or how to modify workspaces, and then sitting down and starting to utilize what the full function or full breadth of what you can get from Macola 10. So if I own ES today and I now am adding the business activity monitoring and workflows and workspaces, what makes the most sense to utilize those new functions within my business to get full use of the software and also to provide my users with a more efficient work environment. So it becomes more about process design and process flow and less about data conversion and being able and training users how to use a completely new system.
And a follow-up to that from a different attendee, is the file structure different in Macola 10 from ES?
It is on the financial side. So the tables on the distribution and manufacturing side are all the same. There are some slight variations that you will have to account for. In progression, the date is stored as a number, 20180101, and in the ES tables, it will all be, or M10 tables, it will all be stored as a date. They've changed some of the field names. You have an ID instead of an A4GL identity, for instance. They've changed some names here and there, rather haphazardly in some circumstances where the table is identical, but even the field name is the same thing, but they just changed the way that it was named for some odd reason. So if you have reports written, there are some steps that you will have to take to convert those manufacturing and distribution reports. It's relatively straightforward. I have to take the number to date function out of formulas. I have to change that to a date. There are some fields mappings that I have to change a little bit. They've added quite a few more user-defined fields and extra fields in the new tables, but those don't impact your capability to convert them. On the financial side, it's completely different. So those tables are different. The AR customer file and AR AP vendor file are technically gone. They're replaced with a table called the CICMPY table, which we call the SICMP table. But in some circumstances, Macola has automatically created views as part of the conversion so that you have a view called AR cus file and AP ven file, and that those two views basically pull that customer information out of the SICMP table and the AP vendor file information out of the SICMP table and still present it to you so that some of your reports that are written using those two tables will still work. Your addresses table is different. So they've got probably half a dozen to 10 views that they've created for the master data on the vendor and customer side, but the transactional data will be completely different, and any reports that you've written on that side will have to be completely rewritten.
Now, is that the same for the ES upgrade to Macola 10, or is the file structure different in ES than it is in
not.
Macola 10?
It's mildly different in that there are two databases now. And then you have to deal with the data moving back and forth. So there's the AS import, the customer data, and the item data. So there is some synchronization between the two databases, between the Synergy databases and Synergy items and customers and contacts and the Macola. So those two databases have to be synchronized, and depending on what you've done, that can be a straightforward process, or it can be complicated. It just depends.
And then a follow-up from the person who asked the previous question, are those differences in the table structure, both from progression to Macola 10 and from ES to Macola 10, are those differences detailed in a white paper someplace, or is there a document that people can get their hands on to sort of get a grasp on what those differences are?
Not that I know of.
Okay. Okay.
Which basically means no.
Okay. Now, let's shift gears a little bit because we've gotten several questions in a row here on data, and then I've got a different sort of a question for you, Jonathan. So I know that Macola 10 comes with CRM functionality. However, we've gotten the question about, does Macola 10 integrate with Goldmine CRM?
I don't believe it does. We can take that as a note and follow up with that person with that question.
Yep.
Technically, you can integrate with anything if the database is out there. It just depends on what type of integration you want to do and at what level you want to do it. So I think that's a conversation that we can have. But out of the box, there's no built-in connection to Goldmine.
Okay. And on top of that, then obviously we haven't really gotten into too much depth about the CRM that does come in Macola 10. And I know that we had some customers that use Goldmine, for instance, or other CRM products years ago with Macola Progression. Could you give just a thumbnail sketch of the CRM that comes integrated into Macola 10 and what benefits there are for people that are upgrading to have that there?
Well, there are a lot of different ways to define CRM, so I guess I'd want a more specific question as far as what they mean by that. Workflows can be used in order to capture customer interaction. So anytime that I talk to a customer, I capture that in a workflow, which then becomes visible to all of the people that need to be responsible for that particular customer based on user groups. There are workflow can be used, and Event Manager can be used for reminders and ticklers. It depends on what type of CRM functionality you're trying to accomplish.
And actually, that's a perfect answer, Jonathan, and I give the answer myself similarly. Are you looking for a CRM that is more like a Rolodex, or are you looking for a CRM that actually is going to be more robust and be usable and help you use the system more effectively in lots of other ways? So I think you're right. I think that that's a discussion that we should have on almost case by case. And I hate to go back to the database question because I know that we could probably spend a half an hour on it. We did get a follow-up. So
Those are popular questions.
It is. And obviously, it's a question that everybody has concerns about because your data is critical and you've got to make sure that you can use it going forward. You mentioned about the combined database. And so the question was asked, is Synergy and the Macola database separate in Macola ES? And I'm not sure if it was meant to be Macola ES or Macola 10. And if they're combined, how? Oh, I'm sorry. They just added in Macola 10. So in Macola 10, there are two databases. How do they work in tandem? And are there plans to combine them, or is that separation for a particular purpose?
The two databases are separate. At one point, they had them combined and they broke them back out. So I do not believe that there are any plans to combine those databases at this point. And there is a tool that runs in the background that synchronizes that data. The customer master and the vendor master are automatically synchronized. So really, at that point, you're just synchronizing items. Financial information is retained on the Macola side, the back office side, and then all the workflow information and everything is maintained on the Synergy side. The interaction is in the master data, customers, vendors, items primarily, and GL accounts. Those all get synchronized back between the two.
Okay, great. And I'm looking for other questions. I'm not seeing any more here. Those are great questions, by the way, on the data. I can't remember having that many follow-ups on one of our webinars with questions specifically about data, so that was tremendous. Now, Jonathan, you touched briefly about business automation, and I know that there's been some discussion about what you can do with those automation tools and how is that different from some of the tools that progression users use, for instance, with the Knowledge Sync Event Manager. Do you want to speak just briefly on some of the ways that automation tools have been made more robust or perhaps have greater impact in Macola 10?
Well, I think the functionality when it comes to automation feeds off of the workflow. So just having the business activity monitoring and being able to tie that into your workflow is what gives you that extended capability in a Macola 10 environment versus just a Macola ES or progression environment. I believe that the functionality that you have in progression for automation is almost non-existent. Now, if you have the Knowledge Sync Event Manager, we do have some customers that have continued to use Knowledge Sync. So to kind of hit on that point, just because you have the business activity monitoring and the new Macola event manager, you don't necessarily have to convert all of your events. We have some customers that have hundreds of events that run in Knowledge Sync, and instead of converting them, they've continued to pay the licensing fee for both of those, and only created the new workflows or new activities in the new event manager, and they've left all of their existing ones in the Knowledge Sync. There is no conversion utility for that. So if you have the Knowledge Sync event manager today and you're going to go forward with business activity monitoring, then you will have to manually convert each one of those activities that have been set up, events.
And that's a great point, Jonathan, about the fact that it's not just about Event Manager. It's about the other tools, such as Workflow. I know I spoke to several people last week at Evolve that were considering Macola 10 and specifically looking at ways that they could become more efficient in their businesses, for instance, going paperless with document management. But more importantly, what they were looking for from Macola 10 were ways that they could, through efficiency, continue to increase their revenue without having to increase headcount. And I know that obviously there are some things that people have been doing with Event Manager in order to automate some processes, like sending out an invoice to a customer via email. However, obviously using Workflow, which you touched on briefly, there are a number of other ways that you can increase efficiency.
Absolutely. You can use the business activity monitoring to look at inventory levels and automatically notify buyers if they need to purchase something, or at least if they need to go evaluate what's going on with something. So you can automatically have reorder reports sent to people. If you have something that occurs or a workflow that gets created that multiple people need to be aware of, rather than somebody having to go send an email to do that, the workflow request goes in and multiple people are notified of a product issue or a manufacturing issue or a customer issue. So the event manager can be used in lots of different ways to drive information through your business without somebody having to pull the trigger on it.
And actually, one of the answers I gave to a woman that I was meeting with last week was increasing efficiency doesn't necessarily mean just automating processes. It's increasing your employees' awareness of issues, and becoming aware of those issues sooner increases efficiency, both in terms of dealing with your customers, but also, as you mentioned, reorder notifications, so that you don't get to the point where you are back ordered on stock or items that your customers are wanting to purchase.
Yeah, even large orders that come in. I mean, sometimes people run an order report every day so that they can go see what the booked order status is, and sometimes an order comes in later in the day and you don't see that until the next day, but you want to be agile and react to that. So that you know that you have this large order that just hit the system. So having an event set up that tells the right people, hey, an order that is 50% larger than our average order size just came in. What do we do about it?
That's a great point. That's a great point. Now, because I mentioned document management, or I'm going to take credit for mentioning document management a moment ago, we did get a follow-up question about, could you talk about document management capability in Macola 10?
Well, so you can attach documents. There's a link into Outlook, and so every document that comes into your email, you can automatically associate to, excuse me, a customer or vendor or task or activity within Synergy. So I receive an email from a customer. I can click the Save button, and that email gets saved into Synergy onto that customer's card, so that when the salesperson who is interacting with that customer wants to know what correspondence that the support team has had with that particular customer or the consulting team, that they can go in and click the Documents button and see all of the emails that have gone back and forth. They don't have to be copied on those emails. They don't have to have their own folder in Outlook that retain all of those emails. All of that information is retained in Synergy. So that's one way to retain documents. You can scan in and attach documents. You can save documents to Synergy. So the idea is that I go into my customer card in Synergy, and I can go into an account here. So if I went into Bicycle, and I went into Bicycle Stop, and I wanted to look at all of the documents, I'm going out on a limb here because I don't even know if there are any documents in here, but we're going to find out.
And I should clarify, Jonathan said that because this is demo data.
Yeah. So there are no documents in here. So all the documents that would be associated to a customer will be listed right here. So everything that I retain would be available. So I have documents that can be attached. I can manually attach documents. I can interact with documents by attaching them myself. So from a document management perspective, it's an interface with Outlook that drives a lot of that. There are also other tools such as Kofax, which is a tool that software that ties to a scanner, and I can scan in documents out on the receiving dock, and it will read the purchase order number and vendor off of that document and automatically link it to that purchase order and to that vendor. And that ties into Synergy. So then I can scan documents out on the dock that automatically get linked into the documents within Synergy. And that tool is called Kofax.
Yeah, and just so everybody understands, basically Kofax uses the optical character recognition technology so that it essentially reads certain fields of your documents and is able to identify whether the company or the company that that document is coming from, and is able to route it or place it in Synergy attached to the appropriate account. But then there are other types of documents also, Jonathan. Obviously, Outlook is what most people are most easily identify as documents. But then I know that we're working with a couple of customers who use document management to keep track of their R&D documents. And versioning control is really important in those cases.
Yep, and that capability is also in here.
So document management is something that obviously there are easy to use tools, and basically what we are tasked with doing when setting that up for you is gaining an understanding of what type of documents you want to save. If it's just emails and maybe quotes that you're providing to customers, that's one thing, but maybe you want to set up, like I said, R&D type of documents or other types of documents. We can help you set those up. And it's basically a process of identifying what types of documents you want to save, what you want to attach them to, as Jonathan said, whether it's just going to an account or a contact or perhaps to a project that's going on. And so that's something we would want to flesh out a little bit, but it is a much more robust document management system than Macola has ever had before. Well, I see we are getting to the end of our time. Jonathan, I have asked you every question that our attendees have sent me so far. So unless somebody else has some last-minute questions they'd like to submit to us, which we'd be happy to answer, Jonathan, I'd like for you to go ahead and wrap up if you would like. Any last-minute comments or thoughts?
The conversion is not a difficult process per se, but sometimes it can be time consuming, and it does take a significant amount of dedication on the part of the customer to do their part, and it also takes a champion on the customer side to drive that change through the business. So any conversion, especially something like this where you're taking progression to Macola 10, requires high-level support and an internal champion and project manager on the customer side to be truly successful, and time dedicated to the data conversion, data cleanup, and the piloting of those processes so that everybody knows what they're supposed to do when they're supposed to do it, so that on day one of go live, I have clean data, and I have employees that know how to do their jobs.
And obviously that's a recipe for a successful upgrade go live, as opposed to data that maybe hasn't been as thoroughly looked at, or users who maybe haven't gone through all the processes that they have to do to perform their jobs. I know, and I'll just piggyback on what Jonathan said. We do have a pretty rigid belief in the piloting process, and making sure that all of your users have seen all the screens before they're going live in the system, so there aren't going to be any surprises. We want to equip them with the knowledge and the tools to be successful on day one and going forward. And a big part of that is making sure that your end users actually have spent time in the new system, not just playing with it, but actually performing their job functions in the new system, so that they're familiar, comfortable, and have an opportunity to ask their questions before they're live in it. Well, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. We're just a couple of minutes short of our allotted time. If anybody has additional questions that you would like to have answered, I want you to feel free to send those to either your account manager here at Algorithm, or you can send them to salesteam@algorithminc.com, and they'll be routed appropriately. Also, I'll share our phone number, 888-522-8588. That is Algorithm. And we'd be happy to discuss your upgrade, to answer any further questions that you have, and to go through the path of evaluating whether the upgrade is right for you, if you're ready for it, and to determine what's the right way for us to kick the project off to be successful. Again, I want to thank Jonathan for his expertise and time this afternoon. Jonathan, thank you very much. It was very helpful and informative. And again, we are recording today's webinar. Once WebEx provides us the recording, we will have that posted within the next 24 hours or so. And if you would like to get a link to the recording, please again send us a message at salesteam@algorithminc.com, and we'd be happy to provide you a link to the recording. We are going to be holding an ongoing webinar series, so please look for reminder emails that we send out to you, and we hope to see you again on the next in the Algorithm webinar series. I hope everybody has a great afternoon, and we look forward to speaking to you again soon. Thanks again, everybody.